Right, so if we move then to the first main item on this community outcomes meeting, which is around hate crime, and I know this is the first New Style report, which seems to be more reflective of the current force position and does provide a lot of narrative around each of the crime stands. So I welcome that, and perhaps if I can just hand over to you now, if you want to just take us through the main aspects. Thank you.
I will do, thank you. So it's the regular quarter report they request from us on hate crime. Outlines the hate crime performance statistics over the last 12 months. And as you're well aware, Commissioner, hate crime is broken down in our reporting into hate crimes and hate incidents. In the last 12 months there's been 4,703 incidents, and of those 3,656 have been crimes. It's important to note at this point that 92% of all of those do not involve battery or physical violence. So 90% are primarily verbal hate crime, and I'll talk you through the different types in a minute. There has been a significant increase, 68%, nearly 70% increase in reporting, which we may wish to discuss, and that's a combination of both, as you're well aware, the increased compliance with Home Office counting rules, but also we're pleased to report there's increased reporting in many of the strands that we monitor, because as you're aware we've had some significant media and community engagement campaigns to increase the confidence of people to report hate crime to us. So in terms of satisfaction, it still remains high, having risen from 83 to 84.5% in the last 12 months with those victims of hate crime. So the first and the largest area of hate crime which we monitor is race hate. It accounts for 80% of the incidents and 90% of the crimes. We've had a high arrest rate of 26% and a good positive outcome rate throughout it, which is detailed in the report. So we continue to record more, investigate more and have more positive outcomes. In terms of faith hate, there's 269 incidents in the last 12 months, and a number of those of concern for us have been around anti-Islam faith hate and anti-Semitic faith hate, and as you're well aware we analyse and monitor those on a weekly and monthly basis. In terms of disability hate crime, 266, again up 101 offences, 61%, as we encourage more people to report disability hate incidents and hate crimes to us. And of the 170 crime reports, we've had 166 outcomes. So again, it just indicates how seriously and how committed we are to dealing with the victims in those cases. In terms of sexual orientation, we've had an increase of, again, 80%, and it stands at 446 incidents over the last year, which has led to 322 crimes. Again, 2/3 of those crimes for sexual orientation are the victims are male, and a slightly older profile, 20 to 49, than we see in other areas. Transphobic hate crime, we've seen 46 incidents in the last year and 30 crimes, and there's a split there between the victim, between male and female. But clearly there's a specific issue with self-defined gender when reporting some of those crimes. So the statistics are all there, but I thought it worthy to just touch a little bit on the joint campaign that we've had with your office that we've been very grateful for. Hate Hurts, Report It, Sort It, Say No to Hate Crime, and that's run since October, and we've had themed monthly themes in relation to that around gender, disability, faith, sexual orientation and race. We also continue with the web chats that I know you've been involved in different themes of encouraging increased reporting in hate crime. We continue with the district scrutiny panels, and we're replicating the good work that you've done yourself, Commissioner, with your youth panel in terms of trying to get up district youth panels as well for both hate crime and stop and search. We continue with the strategic partnership work with local authorities, local third sectors and charities. We've improved our consistency of data sharing with other agencies in the last year. And we've also worked with specific community groups, whether it be the Community Security Trust for anti-Semitic crime, or Tel Mama in relation to Islamic crime, anti-Muslim crime. And we continue to work with our partners in the criminal justice system, specifically CPS, who hold a regional scrutiny panel reviewing lessons learned from criminal justice processes. So, in summary, the crime in all categories has gone up. That's primarily to do with recording and an increased preparedness to come forward, but we're very, very aware of the community feeling around specifically faith-based crime, and there's probably some real increase within those figures. And just a reassurance again that of those aggravated offences and race hate offences, I'll just repeat that the vast majority, whilst it doesn't lessen the impact upon victims, thankfully the vast majority do not involve violence. So the report's there with the statistics. If you have any questions on it.
Yes, I do. Thanks for that report, John. As I've said, I welcome the more detail and narrative within the report around hate crime generally, and you've already mentioned some of the increases, so it's gone up by about 70%.
Yes.
And some of that is real, I think, as you've mentioned, but obviously there's quite a lot of it associated with the new crime recording standards and the proactive approach we've taken to the introduction of the different strands around hate crime. But certainly, again, talking to people in different groups and different communities, it is something that is very real to those that suffer from hate crime. So I think we absolutely need to do more to understand what's going on. So the first question then is around, and you've touched on it already, but it is what analysis has been done so that we fully understand the increase and whether it is, well, what aspects are real in that sense and what more we can do to reassure victims.
So we've done significant analysis of the data, and through that Force Performance Improvement Unit analysis, we feel that there's at least about 4 or 5% increase in real crime. Some of it is specific to events locally and internationally, most specifically around faith crime, and we monitor those to see that there's not peaks and troughs that are continuing. But it's primarily based upon not just the new recording practices, but previous under-reporting that we've seen in many crime types over the history of policing. So we think that there is a little more happening within communities around significant events, locally and internationally, but also we're pleased to report there's more preparedness to report it, and that's the vast majority of the increase, is an increased confidence in being able to report it to us.
Right, and I guess one of the things there is that given obviously we've recommitted our stance around neighbourhood policing and protecting PCSOs and recruiting more diversity into the force, is that what more can we do around officers on the ground, as it were, really understanding the issues around hate crime?
So we continue to focus around neighbourhood policing being the bedrock of what we deliver, and the development of the ward manager model, and they are our front line for problem solving in relation to repeat offences. So they apply a problem solving approach in the neighbourhoods. But certainly the protective services operations, the crime, the patrol and the safeguarding teams are all well aware through internal training, development and awareness campaigns, because of course all of our campaigns are both internal and external, that we keep them refreshed and up to date to the different strands of hate crime.
Yeah, what I would say is, John, is that for our local officers to seek out every opportunity they can, working with our communities
Yes.
and the groups in those areas to provide reassurance and just make them aware that they are obviously very open to receiving reports. Yes. And trying to work through problems at the local level.
Yeah.
You mentioned also around the satisfaction rate for victims, which is about 84.5%. Are you aware that that previously the survey only looked at satisfaction of race hate, and if it is race hate, you know, will you welcome the figures on all hate crime in future reports?
Yes, it's a matter that your office has raised before with us, Commissioner. So since last year, we have now, I'm pleased to report, we have now been reporting and are able to report satisfaction on all crime types, from disability, faith, race, sexual orientation, and transphobic crime. But the data is just building, and of course, the vast majority is race hate crime. So that disproportionately affects the figures. So as we go through the year, we'll get a greater database for the very low numbers in the other crime types.
Yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, and hopefully that will help us to again better understand some of the specific issues in some of those categories. Again, I've noted that 80% of all hate crime is race hate. And given that 1,295 outcomes where a suspect was identified but the decision was taken not to proceed, do we know the percentage of the victim refuses to support aspect, and do we know of any further work to understand the reasons for that?
So it's just about 1 in 10, 13% outcomes for race hate crime are finalised with the suspects being identified, but the victim doesn't wish to support the prosecution. That's 377. And when we've looked at that through the satisfaction and the local district scrutiny groups, the main reason given is there's an identification of the suspect, but they wish them to be spoken to, for their behaviour to be challenged, for the impact upon the victim to be explained to the potential offender, but they don't wish to proceed with a formal process towards them. So that's where we see that as a positive outcome, because it's being victim-led, and that will be primarily in local neighbourhood verbal-only disputes. So it is a position where we're victim-led in that sense. So it's a good outcome, as long as the offender and or the alleged offender doesn't become a repeat offender, because then the behaviour is challenged. So
when you say it's victim-led, and so a conversation takes place, and are they given the options, or is it explained to them what the options are?
Yes, in terms of whether there would be a formal criminal prosecution, whether there would be a local resolution and a community outcome, or whether there would be just a conversation with the individual. But it's primarily to do with neighbourhood dynamics and wanting it to stop, rather than seeing a punitive approach to it.
So it's an appropriate resolution in those circumstances, yeah?
In accordance with what the victim desires.
Right,
yeah.
Okay, right. Moving on to faith hate, paragraph 9. I note the significant increase again in faith hate crime, given the number of victims defining their ethnicity as Asian. What more are we doing to support those specific communities?
Yeah, so it's around 40% have an ethnicity of Asian, and that's why we're continuing in the 5 districts to not only work with local authorities and charities and third sector organisations to support our campaigns, but while we've worked heavily with an organisation that I think you're aware of, Commissioner Telmama, around information sharing, because we don't have all of the answers to this problem solving. So taking through them, providing third-party support to people who are victims, and to provide outreach events, again encouraging further reporting. So we're not standing still on it, we're constantly seeking new avenues of community and partnership engagement to ensure that we're supporting what are on occasions very vulnerable communities.
Yeah, and again, it does come back to taking those opportunities to engage wherever we can in those communities. Question 5 for me is around disability hate. So in the report, it states that nearly 19% of disability hate crime involved some acquisitive crime, which is significantly higher excuse me, than other strands, which are only around 1 to 3%. What are we doing to protect vulnerable and or disabled people against acquisitive crime?
Yeah, and it's right to identify that. Often it's a specific targeted approach upon that individual, and we're using traditional crime prevention techniques but tailored towards that vulnerable group. So we've had a campaign running with neighbourhood policing officers and PCSOs around mate crime and about raising awareness amongst certain parts of the disabled communities in our communities around mate crime and exploitation, vulnerability, and they then weave into whether it be cyber-enabled crime or other strands of hate crime. So it's tailoring our existing preventative measures specific into the potential disabled victims within the communities, and the best people to do that in the main are the PCSOs and ward managers and neighbourhood policing officers to keep them safe.
Yeah, because I mean that that figure is a worry. If disabled people are not only being targeted but within acquisitive crime as well. So I think we will need to watch that one and take action wherever we can.
I think as we increase reporting and there's more verbal abuse of disabled people reported, whilst one won't take away the focus, because you're very right to identify it, it may just be an element of the statistics around the very low numbers.
Okay. And just following on from that, so can you explain more about the evidential difficulties mentioned in paragraph 13?
The main issue is around a lack of corroborative evidence from other witnesses, from CCTV, from forensic evidence, and tends to be what people would understand to be a word-on-word crime. So again, we're then into the victim's ability to articulate what's actually occurred and the sequence and the timeliness. So it effectively becomes a single strand between the victim and a potential offender, where there's limited or no options of other independent evidence. So of the 52 outcomes, there was just 4 finalised as CPS decision not to prosecute, and the others were police decisions based on that lack of primary evidence. So once the preventative work has been done, we then move into the investigative side, and again districts within their vulnerability units, their safeguarding units often pick up these investigations, and increasingly we're putting the specialists, investigators into the arena to maximise every single possible opportunity to look after that vulnerable victim. So it's in the main the circumstances of those specific offences with a lack of other evidence to take forward the prosecution.
And is it a case that there isn't CCTV footage available, or is there a different policy around viewing CCTV footage in these types of cases where more vulnerable people are potentially involved?
No, it's in the main that it's not available. Of course, we do take proactive steps to deploy CCTV where we can do to protect them from being repeat victims. But in the main, it's just in the circumstances of those crimes, they're not there. They're not predominantly street-based crimes, they're more crimes within communities where the CCTV isn't available.
But if it was available, is there a slightly different approach to the vulnerability aspect of an incident?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And it's categorised today. Hate crime, more specific vulnerable, we'll take every opportunity to secure and preserve that evidence, yes.
Right, thank you. And then finally within disability hate crime, so throughout the report the number of outcomes recorded, which you've mentioned, are provided along with the number of crimes recorded. For example, 3,053 race hate crimes were recorded and 2,873 recorded as outcomes. Can you just say what is the result of those crimes recorded that don't get an outcome recorded?
I don't know yet, because it's all to do with the statistics. The first figure is those crimes that are recorded within that year, and the second figure is those crimes that are finalised within that year. So don't necessarily relate to the two. So the missing figure of 1,000 or so are the ones that are yet to be finalised. So they will then feed into the future years. And the reason why there's a disparity is as we're increasing the volume and the number, we'll always record more than we're finalising, because we're finalising in the main the last few months or potentially last year's crime. So they will come through in the fullness of time, but they're not a direct relationship between 3,000 crimes and only 2,800 of those crimes have been finalised. It's not quite that.
So there's a time lag sort
Yes.
of differential.
Yeah.
But I mean, clearly the aim is to have an outcome for as many as possible.
No, all crimes
Yeah.
will. There's 21 outcome codes, and
Yeah.
all crimes will have an outcome.
So in the process of time, there will be an outcome
Yes.
to every.
Yes, most
Right.
definitely.
Okay, right. Yeah, well, just generally, just a comment. I mean, obviously, again, you've mentioned that there's no doubt that it has been an underreported crime generally around hate crime in the different strands. But as you know, I've been involved in funding some projects to better understand, for example, trans and Islamophobic hate crime through the Safer Communities Fund. And you might also be aware that the trans feedback has already been shared with West Yorkshire Police, and we will do the same for Islamophobia.
Thank you.
So based on that feedback, I still think there's more for us to do, and I look forward to continuing the joint campaigns around this and looking again at the categories and how we take forward further work based on that information we receive.
And we really welcome that, because as you're well aware, often victims are more prepared to come to third-party reporting, more prepared to explain any lack of confidence in policing to other organisations. So the involvement of the OPCC and yourself in funding those issues is gratefully received, because it gives us a deeper and wider picture of exactly the reasons that people aren't reporting to us.
Right, okay, thank you.